A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Young men in regional Australia are some of the most high-risk people in our nation. The risk of self-harm, self-medication, drug and alcohol abuse, and even worse, is much higher than their counterparts in the cities. A man today has a story. He's from Dubbo in New South Wales, and he joins us on 2020 to share a little bit of his life journey. Luke, welcome.
Hello, how are we?
Great to have you, mate. Dubbo is a very, very significant regional centre in Australia. Everyone knows Dubbo. And Luke, but not everyone knows you. I want you to tell us a little bit of your story and the challenges you faced as a young man growing up in regional Australia.
Challenges growing up. I mean, it wasn't so bad, to be honest. Like growing up out here, in terms of being, it's all I knew. But in terms of my health, I suppose once I got to about 16, 17, 18, I started to realise that there was something wrong with my mental health and that I needed some help. It was very, very apparent when things started going wrong, and it was a hard time. It was a tough time, and from there, I went on a 10-year-long journey of really trying to make sense of things, I suppose, where I really lost my way, fell into the drug and alcohol addiction, and things that come with the territory.
Let me ask you, Luke, if you can think back to when you were young, what were you feeling? Like when you said you had mental health challenges, what was going on inside your mind and inside your emotions? Like what was causing you to self-medicate with drugs and alcohol?
When I was 18, that was the first time I realised that there was something wrong and I needed to go to a doctor and get some help. I was having very, very horrid thoughts that were quite violent, and it scared me quite a lot. So I went and saw a doctor who diagnosed me with depression, started me on medication. But what else was happening at that time? I suppose so I'm Aboriginal myself. I suppose it's known that Aboriginal people will experience there's a higher prevalence of mental illness and drug and alcohol and substance use and things like that. So I suppose generational wounds passed down was one thing that impacted my mental health. I had some significant relationship breakdowns around me as well, which impacted me. I had some identity issues and was really searching for belonging. Was probably the main stuff that led me on that, or that influenced my journey.
Yeah, and people say it's a generalisation that a lot of young men, especially from regional areas, they often don't talk a lot. Did you find it hard to tell people you needed help or to reach out, other than your doctor? Did you find it yourself suffering in silence a lot?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I don't now. Life's very different now, but thinking back to that time, absolutely. I mean, I played football. You're from a country town. You're meant to be tough and all that other stuff. You're meant to just not cry or whatever else. So it was hard, and I think that's generally men across the board, not just regional Australia, but I think that's men everywhere. But I have noticed, Andrew, over time that I think that's getting a bit better. I think men are getting better at talking about mental health and issues that we go through, which is great.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the younger generation are different in many ways. Some of those differences are better, some are worse. But I do find that younger people are more inclined to talk than certainly our parents' generation, Luke. I mean, you remember, blokes often just didn't say much at all, but their value was in their work. Their value was in their contribution. Maybe they were providers or they were workers or whatever they did, farmers, business people, and that was really how they contributed. They didn't have to say a lot, did they, in the old days? But yeah, it's a fair call, mate, that people do talk more, and that's a healthy thing. So did you find that you did find people you could talk to eventually?
Not until I found the Lord, Andrew. Back then, I didn't want to. It's funny to say I wanted help. I desperately need help, but at the same time, I felt like I couldn't get help because of the illness inside me wouldn't allow it. It's hard to describe, like in this short time we're talking together, but it felt like I wasn't in control, and that I had something inside of me that wouldn't. It's hard to put into words, but it's like I wanted help, I needed help. At the same time, I wasn't able to. Mental illness is a tough thing, I suppose.
It is, and you know what? Many of our listeners will relate to what you're saying, Luke. Even though you can't articulate it, they probably can't either. Or many of our listeners may even know someone like you who's suffering in silence and doesn't really know how to express what they're going through. So obviously in that frustration, you turn to the numbing power of drugs and alcohol just to try and help you get through things.
Yeah, and it was significant, Andrew. It was about from about age 17 up until 27. I used drugs heavily, used alcohol heavily, all drugs. I was using intravenously, injecting. It was not a pretty time, and it was very much self-soothing and numbing pain and hurts and things like that. It was destructive, to say the least. The more I tried to run from myself, the more I got hurt and the more I was hurting people. I burnt bridges with family, friends. I was in debt over my head. Life was a complete mess.
Yeah, but somewhere and somehow, Luke, the light of the gospel shone into your life, and I really want you to tell us how that happened.
Oh man, I've already got chills just about to start talking about it. Usually don't get chills until about halfway, but I'm already okay. It was 2013. It was I'd been running from myself for a while. I had an argument with some family on Christmas Day, wrecked Christmas for everyone that was there, and I spiraled into myself, and I just drank for 3 days straight. I drank myself into oblivion, and I remember doing things over those days, but I couldn't tell you which day it was that I did a certain thing on. I just remember doing things a bit hazy. So after these 3 days of drinking, I lived by myself in a suburb in Sydney, and I was walking home, and I was in so much pain, Andrew. I was just hurting, from the 3 days of punishing myself, and just I was emotionally, physically, I was just sore, and I walked into my bedroom. I closed the door and I fell on my knees and I just cried out to the Lord. And it wasn't a very good prayer, I have to tell you. I actually, I said to the Lord, God, I need help. And I was crying, it's not everywhere, and it was just, I said, I need help, Lord. Lord, if you take addiction away from me, I will follow you. And if you think about that, I propositioned to the Lord. I said, if you do this for me, then I will follow you. It was not the right wording. But what I believe happened was the Lord actually heard my heart. And what happened is I sat there and I cried into my hands. I just felt this something surrounds me, and it was like this big warm hug, and the storm in my head and the pain, it just dissolved, and I just nestled into whatever it was that was holding me, and I just felt secure and comforted and pain-free. My mind was clear. And after a while, I have no idea how much time went by while I kneeled on the floor in that moment. But after a while, I got up and I got into bed. And I woke up the next morning, and I knew exactly what happened. I knew it was undeniable that the Lord had heard my heart, had comforted me in that moment. So I prayed again, and it was an incredible experience. Like I said, I've got goosebumps all over me talking about it. It was incredible, radical even, and just absolutely undeniable that was the Lord who had comforted me. I prayed again, committed my life again that morning, and I have never looked back. And with the addiction, Andrew, so I had, up until that point, I had tried everything in the book to get addiction out of my life. And the Lord, in that moment, when I asked him to take addiction away from me, has removed it so far from me in that moment. He left not even a speck of craving, of sickness, of withdrawals, or anything. And we're coming up to 10 years now, so 10 years this just after Christmas this year that happened.
Well done, Luke. I'll tell you what, if you're saying that wasn't a good prayer, I'd like to hear a good one, because it sounds like it changed your life, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I don't think the words matched what was in my heart, and I believe the Lord heard what I meant to say.
Well, what's the Bible say? The kingdom of God is not in word, but in power. So I don't think God worries about our words as much as we think he does sometimes, but like you said, he looks at the heart. But Luke, I'm going to segue out of that story, and what an amazing story, and I'm so glad you shared it, because a lot of our listeners are in regional Australia, and statistically, young men in regional Australia are more at risk of self-harm and self-medicating, as I said, on drugs and alcohol, and even worse. And so I believe your story is going to inspire a lot of people, even parents, brothers and sisters, partners, girlfriends, husband, wives, aunties, uncles. There's lots of us who have people struggling. But I'm going to segue out of that amazing story and tell a short story now that you have written a book called Radical Recovery, a lived experience guide for hope and mental well-being. And obviously, Luke, this book tells a little bit of your story and also encourages others to get out of any dark pits that they find themselves in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, it's funny. When I started writing this book, Andrew, I never intended to write a book. I wrote the first chapter, and I was going through a mental illness episode, and I was not doing well. I was transitioning medication, and I just grabbed a pen and paper, and I wrote down my thoughts and my feelings and what I was doing, what was happening in my head. So I penned the first chapter, and then I didn't touch it for 3 years. I found it, somewhere 3 years later, and thought, oh, geez, there's something in this, what I wrote that day. And then from there, I started writing this book. So I've written it in 3 parts. First part is basically what we've been talking about. It's a testimony of some of the hardest and significant events that happened in my life. The backstory, the lived experience, the getting saved, and then how life has been changed since becoming a Christian. So that's all in part 1. Part 2 is the sense I make for why God allows mental illness in my life. Pause for dramatic effect.
Yep.
And what I mean by that is, God is God, right? And God is powerful. God removed addiction from my life in something that plagued me, something that tied me down, something that hurt me for so long that I felt like I couldn't do anything about. God removed that in an instant without leaving a speck of craving, sickness, nothing. However, mental illness has continued in my life. And it was about after 6 months, about 6 months after I got saved, I started to change my perspective about mental illness. I started to look to God and say, okay, God, this mental illness is continuing in my life. Before that, I was just trying to get rid of it. Like, what is the purpose, God, for allowing mental illness in my life? Because I know you could take it away if you wanted to. Therefore, why don't you? So I started to look up to God instead of just looking at my mental illness and trying to get rid of it. I started to look at God and think, what is the purpose? So I started to shift my thinking. And when I was able to do that, things started to make sense to me about why I live with mental illness now. Like what it has to teach me, how I'm able to grow because of mental illness. Like one example is, I believe mental illness teaches me about God's heart. It teaches me that other people with lived experiences like me are valued, are loved by God, and deserve every opportunity to meet Him. It's a little bit hard to explain, but part two, there's a bunch of examples I've put in the book about why God allows mental illness in my life.
Yeah, so you found purpose in your suffering, as using Bible terminology there. That's wonderful, Luke. Well, I just want to encourage everyone who's listening to this, who's been touched by Luke's story, to check out this book. It's called Radical Recovery, A Lived Experience Guide for Hope and Mental Wellbeing. The author is Luke Towney. That's Towney. He's also a pastor of a Baptist church in Dubbo. If you're in Dubbo, check him out. And Luke, I want to thank you so much, and also just ask you, how do people find the book?
Yeah, so it's been published through Ark House Press. Ark House Press. So if you head to their website, arkhousepress.com. I think it's just .com. You'll find the book on there. But it'll be published, it'll be available on Amazon, on Koorong Bookstore, Barnes & Noble, places like that. So, yes.
Just search it up, Radical Recovery, A Lived Experience Guide for Hope and Mental Wellbeing. Luke, I want to thank you so much for sharing a little bit of your journey, and hoping and praying this book is a great blessing and help to many people.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you having me on, and my prayer is that to offer hope to people that go through similar things that I've been through, and I believe this book can do that. I pray that many lives will be touched.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.